Hi, everyone. We're here today to talk with Garron to talk about navigating the product design app critique interview. For those of you who aren't already familiar with Exponent, Exponent helps you get your dream tech career with our online courses, expert coaching, peer-to-peer mock interviewing platform, and interview question database. Check it out at tryexponent.com. Okay, thank you so much for being here with us today, Garron. Would you quickly introduce yourself to our viewers?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Garron Engstro. I'm a product design manager at Meta. I've been there for about 6.5 years, worked in a few different parts of the org, started in ads, and then I was in the video design team. And then the last 3 years or so have been on the social impact org. So you might have seen some of the products that we make, fundraising, so all sorts of nonprofit fundraising, birthday fundraisers. A lot of people have interacted with those. Crisis response, hopefully nobody's interacted with that, but if you're ever in a crisis area, you can let people know you're safe and sort of get access to help locally. And then all sorts of other products. We have an equity team, a health team, a civic team. So trying to make progress on like major social issues.
Yeah, that's such an impressive array of experiences. And I think we're all really excited to hear your take on how to do well in these types of interviews. Okay, so let's get started. I thought it might be great to start with the basics. Can you tell us what exactly an app critique interview even is and how is it evaluated?
Yeah, so an app critique, basically, you get on the phone with the interviewer and you'll both kind of open up your phones and you'll pick an app. Typically, it's the interviewer who will pick the app. They want it to be a little bit random for you, but every once in a while they'll let you pick the app. But typical apps to be chosen are Google Maps, Spotify, Yelp, LinkedIn, sort of things that you use probably daily or weekly. And so typically what will happen is you'll walk through the different flows and the screens and you'll offer your thoughtful critique on the visual design, the interaction design, navigation, things like that. Mm-hmm. And typically what they're looking for is the same thing they're looking for in all interview formats, is they want to know how good is your interaction design skills, visual design, and product thinking. But I would say more than other interviews, the app critique is an opportunity to highlight your intentionality, which is another of those like major product design skill sets that folks are looking for. So it's really about like strong rationale to back up your design decisions, how you communicate your rationale clearly and effectively. And you can really showcase that quite a bit in this interview format.
Okay, so rationale and intentionality sound like some main themes here. Can you tell us a little bit more like how an interviewee would actually approach being able to show those qualities off in the app critique?
Yeah, I like to think about this interview format as an opportunity to like reverse engineer the design of the app. So like, obviously you were not the person who designed this app, but you can often put yourself in the shoes of the person who did. And that's how you sort of showcase this intentionality. Let's see, yeah, how to approach it. So yeah, I would say starting from, it's pretty easy to just like dive right in and start like offering, visual and interaction design critiques, but yeah. I think it's more thoughtful to sort of like take a 10,000 foot view approach. And before opening the app, just like talk about the company, talk about the problems that existed before this app was built. Mm-hmm. Like presumably this company charges money for this app, or like maybe they don't, and that's interesting. Like, how do they make money off of this? Why do they staff teams of product designers and engineers on this thing? So really just taking like a step back and talking more about the business and the problem space.
So like the bigger picture first before diving into the details.
Exactly. And I think that's a good opportunity to sort of frame the rest of the interview too. So if you identify who are the core users, what are their use cases, then you can sort of zero in on like, okay, so that's an interesting use case that we just identified. Like, let's walk through the app using that use case. And you can sort of frame the rest of the interview around that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's like a really effective structure for your answer. Okay, so these interviews, they're pretty hard. And I imagine there's a lot of common mistakes that people make. Can you tell us a little bit about some common mistakes to watch out for?
Yeah, hands down, the most common mistake is literally just describing everything you're seeing in the app. So it happens all the time where like you open up the home screen, maybe it's Google Maps, for example, and it's just like, cool, so it's a map and there's a search bar at the top and there's navigation at the bottom. It's like, yeah, I can also see that. That's not what I care about. Yeah. Like, why are these things placed here? How do they conform or not conform to typical design standards? And so I think just really not offering thoughtful critique is the biggest mistake that people make. And I think there's a few ways to overcome this. One thing that I like to do and try to pull out of people during this interview is like playing devil's advocate. So it's pretty easy to offer like negative feedback or like critique on something like, oh, I don't like the way that that's designed. It's a lot harder to sort of like reverse it and say like, well, why did they design it that way?
Okay.
Because presumably there are smart designers working for this company. Like, why did they make the decisions they made? So I think always following up like any sort of negative feedback or any sort of critique on the app with like the reverse of that. It's like, but I can see why they made that decision.
Okay, I see. Yeah. And so when it comes to reverse engineering or making these types of critiques, do you have recommendations for like how to do that? Like, do people draw on their own experience? Do they compare to other apps? Are there specific questions that you recommend they think about?
Yeah, so I think if you're making these types of like putting yourself in the shoes of the designer, pulling upon your own experiences is super helpful. So, again, thinking about the Google Maps example, like there's these sort of like pill navigation at the top. Like, why do you think they designed it that way? Why do you think that why is the first one restaurants versus like the last one like gas?
Yeah.
Like why did they make these decisions? And if you have experience designing that type of components, like talking about your experience designing that component, maybe any sort of like insights or data that you can draw from that. It's like, oh, well, actually, like from having launched something like that, I know that anything off screen is going to get very little interaction. So like you have to think about that when you're designing that and like be very intentional about which ones you put first, second, and third.
Gotcha.
And then I think, like you mentioned, making comparisons. So Google Maps, it's very easy to draw comparisons to Yelp, right? Like they're very different apps in terms of their use cases, but there's a lot of comparisons you can make. So Google Maps is much more about like the main use case is how do I get from A to B? Yelp is much more about like, where should I go to eat tonight? But there's some overlaps, right? Like you can find a restaurant on Google Maps. There's also reviews on there. So like a question I like to ask as an interviewer is, so we're critiquing Google Maps. Let's imagine that your director of product comes in and says, we need to become the place for people to go to review and read reviews for restaurants. Like, how do you do that? How do you how does Yelp do that? How would you bring that onto Google Maps?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's great because I think it gives you an idea of like what works or doesn't work for different sectors of the market. It's a good example to look at. I'm curious also, though, you recommended like drawing on your own experience. Do you have any recommendations for what to do when you have never designed a particular product before, or maybe aren't even familiar with using it?
Yeah, so I think if you don't have that sort of wealth of experience to draw upon, I think just thinking about how you might redesign that or like the questions you would want to ask in research. I think these are the things that are like that show how you think about solving problems, because even as an experienced designer, I come across new and novel problems to solve all the time, like that I can't draw upon previous experiences. So I think it's just important to show your thought process. Like, what are the questions you would ask? How would you work with a researcher to get those, or a data scientist to get those questions answered? And how would you proceed without having those answers?
Yeah, and that's a pretty difficult process, right? Do you have recommendations on like how people would should they prepare a list beforehand of like questions that could guide their thinking? What is your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some like questions you can be prepared for. So like we mentioned earlier at the beginning of the app critique, sort of like pulling back and talking more holistically about the app, like be ready to talk about the use cases of any app. A lot of times you can, since it's an app that you probably use, like there's of course your use case, but what are other use cases? Is it a three-sided marketplace or a two-sided marketplace? And like, how do those other market participants involves like use the app? So with Google Maps, it's like there's restaurants. Like, how do they interact with Google Maps? And then again, with the business context, like how does this company make money? What do you imagine their business goals and metrics are? And like, as you're walking through the app, talk about like how this specific experience you think furthers those business metrics. I like to use lots of hypotheticals. So I mentioned the one like, imagine your director of design walks in, or your director of product walks in and like asks X, like how would you respond to that? Because you really want to know how this person sort of like thinks and operates.
Yeah.
I think a fun one at the end to maybe be ready for is, okay, so let's imagine you're starting as a product designer at Google Maps or X, whatever app on Monday. Like, what would you do? What team would you want to join? How would you go about joining that team? More about like the soft skills, like your people, how you work with people, and how you approach problems.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's really open-ended. Do you have any tips on like what they might be looking for with a question like that?
Yeah, so I think this one's a little bit more about like self-awareness and your like people skills, more than like the actual answer doesn't matter. But I think what a red flag for me as an interviewer would be like, oh, that problem I identified in the app, I would go solve that problem. It's like, well, there's probably a lot more that goes into it. So what I want to hear is like, I want to solve that problem, but I want to first talk to the researcher. Like, what do we know about this? What do we not know? Like, is this even a problem? Like, I, as a user, have identified it as a problem, but maybe it's not. I want to talk to the product manager to see what like the roadmap looks like for the next 6 months. I want to know like what's been tried in the past. Like maybe they've tried to solve this problem, or maybe it's not a problem at all.
Yeah, so that kind of shows humility, I think, right? And like willingness to like resourcefulness and willingness to like work with others.
Yeah, I think we've all probably like been on a team where a new person joins and they think they have all the answers. And it's like, I've been on the team for a while and I don't have all the answers. So like, I don't know why you think.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely like some humility and like wanting to learn and sort of absorb yourself in the product team.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so thank you so much for giving us a quick rundown today of what to expect for the product design app critique interview. We really enjoyed having you. And one last thing, we were wondering, do you have any tips or like resources on how best to prepare for these interviews?
Yeah, so I have written an ebook on product design interviewing. It covers the app critique, but also all sorts of other interview formats like the portfolio review and the background interview. So yeah, that can be found at uxinterviewtraining.com.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'm sure that'll be really useful for all of our viewers. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Angelica. Nice chatting with you.
Okay, thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons below to let us know that this video is valuable for you. And of course, check out hundreds more videos just like this at tryexponent.com. Thanks for watching and good luck on your upcoming interview.